Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is the Miro Consulting webinar on Microsoft Multiplexing and how it affects your licensing. We're going to begin the webinar in about 1 minute. We're just going to give everyone a chance to log in. Again, this is the Miro Consulting webinar on Microsoft Multiplexing and how it affects your licensing. We are going to begin the webinar in just about a minute. We're just going to give everyone a chance to log in. All right, and if you're just joining us, hello, this is Miro Consulting, and this is our webinar on Microsoft Multiplexing and how it affects your licensing. I am your host. My name is Sean Donahue. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Miro Consulting. And for giving the presentation today will be Vince Allison, one of our Microsoft senior analysts. Next slide. So just real quick to tell you who we are and why we're a good source of information for this. We are a leading global provider of software asset management and subscription management services for Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon Web Services, and Salesforce. We specialize in license and subscription management, audit, defense and advisory, negotiation tactics, support management, and cloud services. Our mission is to help our clients maximize their ROI on their software license and subscription investments, stay in compliance, and negotiate successful contracts and audit settlements. And the best thing about doing business with Miro, and which makes us different than everyone else out there, is we have a performance guarantee. And that states simply that the cost savings you will achieve will be more than the cost of our fees. So that makes it a no risk, and you've got nothing to lose by working with us. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Vince to give you the presentation. Vince?
Thank you, Sean. So multiplexing with Microsoft can be a concern for some users or organizations. I think best thing to do is define multiplexing. Multiplexing is when you use like a hardware or software as a barrier between accessing the actual software, an actual server or different software that Microsoft may provide, and between that and the end user or end users. Usually this is done to maybe as a pooling thing to reduce the number of licenses that may be required with some publishers. It also can be a way of a product such as like SharePoint or a project server, as we'll get into some examples going through here on how that can be also considered multiplexing, because you're accessing that server that's then accessing SQL Server or Windows Server or any other product that may use as a backup. The reason we do this is this can be a concern for people that are licensing the Microsoft servers that require client access license. So again, sometimes these are used to, because it's a backend server of a particular of a server that's out there or software. It can also be used to reduce licenses with some products. Again, the big thing to remember is Microsoft requires a client access license or for the end user or device to be licensed regardless of level of separation. So if there's multiple areas between the two, Microsoft doesn't care. They say that end user or device that's finally accessing it needs the client access license. I have a quick example here of project server. This is, can be used for just about any other software out there, but the example here is end users or devices are accessing project server. That project server uses a SQL Server to store its data, and that SQL Server and project server are both running on a Windows server. In this scenario, anybody that's hitting that project server is going to require both a project server client access license, a SQL Server client access license, and a Windows Server client access license. And when I say that's really important, because if you go to the servers, The server itself of SQL may only see one person is accessing it. It's going to see the project server. It's not going to see the end users or the devices on the far end that are doing it. Now, as that's going through, the other area of multiplexing is when you have the pooling software involved. As you can see on the right-hand side here, these users are hitting a pooling software that may only allow, let's say, 50 people at a time to access the network. In that scenario, Microsoft doesn't care if you allow 50 people, 100 people, or 5 people at a given time. It's always the maximum number of people that are accessing that server or software is always going to require licensing. The big one that I run into on our end is SQL Server. The reason is SQL Server really isn't one of those servers that you access directly. Let's say something like Exchange or SharePoint, where you go and you log into the server and you can see it. SharePoint's really on the back end. SharePoint provides the data for the particular servers or software that's running. So it's really easy to miss that if you knowing you may require a client access license. The thing to remember is SQL Server is licensed two ways. One is with a server client access license for SQL Standard. There's also, if you have existing SQL Enterprise, you can renew those licenses if they were if they had client access licenses with them. The way Microsoft's really pushing for SQL is to go in a per core option. A per core option in these scenarios really requires you license it for each core that's supporting that SQL server, and you have an unlimited number of users that can access it. So as we go here, remember, you get the unlimited users to access, and that's just accessing that particular SQL server. It's not always the cheapest option. It sometimes is, sometimes isn't. This is where, again, it's really important to understand what products are being used by SQL, which products are using it, which users are doing it, what kind of users. Are they internal users? Are they external users? All these things can change and add to whether or not, okay, can you do it with a client access license, or do you have to go per core? That's a big thing to know, because if you buy the wrong one, there's not really a change from per core to server cal option with SQL, and there's not a change from per core to server cal. So you can't go back and forth. It's really, you choose that licensing. If you find out that's the wrong one, then you go out and you have to buy new licensing at that point for those products. Project server. I have this as an example on their project. Notice that if you do project server requires SQL as the backend. The project client access license that you buy does not include a SQL Server client access, nor does it include the Windows. So those client access licenses are always added on to that project cost. Again, here, when you're getting into some of these servers that you don't always may not realize uses SQL, or you have a team that installs it, and maybe that team was told by a third-party publisher that, hey, you don't have to worry about SQL because this product doesn't your end users won't access it directly. They access our software. We've had a lot of customers be told that, and then they tend to be non-compliant. So again, anytime you're looking at any of these server accesses, just because of some of these surprises, it's really good to understand where you are, how you're buying it, and the ramifications that can happen because of whatever solution you choose. Now, I have an example here for Azure DevOps Server. I know a lot of people are switching to the Azure. Microsoft's really been pushing that. If you're accessing Azure DevOps, uses SQL and some other products, any of the other products on here, if you're doing what's called manual delivery of files. So what that is, if you said, hey, Vince, I need a file from something on here or from over this customer, I pull that data and I send it to you. In that scenario, you don't have to worry about a client access. I don't have to worry about a client access license for you, because I'm the one accessing it. I'm the one that's manually pulling the data, and I'm sending it to end users or sending it to people in the organization. Here again, that client access license isn't needed for those people that got that manual file, but the person that's pulling it. So an example here we go. We have an automated process is set up. It moves it up to a server farm, and then that server farm automatically loads those files onto desktops. So what you have here, you're using the features of that DevOps server to do the work and to send you these reports and to send you these things to you. Here in this scenario, it require the DevOps server cal, because you have that it's autonomous, the server's doing the work, and that end user or device is benefiting from that server doing that work. Example 2, we have another option. People are running these reports. You're receiving a direct benefit of the server, and then even though you're kind of reviewing this report, because you're posting it automatically, you're still need a CAL, a client access license, because here again, it really falls into, are you directly benefiting from that server? And I know I want to keep hounding on this just because I've seen a lot of customers become non-compliant and see a huge purchase at the end that they weren't expecting. It's really good to understand your environment and how it's used and how you're planning to go. If you're planning on going to something like Azure or some kind of a new solution, it's not as simple as maybe Microsoft or maybe a third-party app person wants you to think it is. Hey, just simply buy this license, or you'll go to this solution and it's done. With Azure, it's confusing because when we're talking Azure and some of these other products, you're talking subscriptions, you're talking users that you have to name. So a lot of times it tends to be, it looks like it's a little bit easier that, hey, I can't be non-compliant here because I have these users named out. There may be people that are benefiting from this that you don't realize. So there may be other clients down the road, and Microsoft sees these things. They see how you're using these products, and this is what triggers audits with Microsoft. They see the potential revenue that's sitting there, and they view it as easy revenue because you are using that server or that feature. So here again, each server in the farm, each desktop user in this scenario, because you have an automated process again, uploading it. Here we see again that there is a client access license again required. I think the ongoing theme here is it's going to be harder to explain why you don't need a client access license, why you don't need to buy a license, than it is why you do need one. Microsoft holds the agreement info on this. They hold the terms and the product usage. So they really they dictate, who can and who can't do it and why. Another popular solution customers are moving to is the Dynamics 365. Good customer CRM tool. When you're using it, a lot of times for their CRM tools, this is an area where where customers like to use pooling software. Hey, I have the CRM software. I only have 20, 30 people at a time to access it. So really, hey, I only need to buy 30 licenses. I let them sit there, and when the 31st person tries to log in, they can't. With Microsoft, that doesn't matter. Remember, Microsoft's always, every user or device that's accessing that has to have a client, and it's always the maximum number that may access it and that has access to that server. So an example I have here for a 365 example is, a user manually exports data from the Dataverse and uploads to an external storage. The colleagues edit the data, and the user manually imports the data back into the database. So in this scenario, again, you're going to have the licensing for the people that are uploading this information. Anyone viewing the data, if it's just viewing the information, I upload it, it's on a static file. The person's just looking at that data that's there. Those people don't need the licensing to access or to view this data, because they're not pulling the data, they're not viewing any type of automation from it, and they're not manually inputting or removing any info. So another example is you have a Power Platform. You have the colleagues that consume and edit the data. So in that scenario, because they're consuming the data, they're using the data that's there, they're probably pulling some, they're maybe editing as well. Here, these users that in the past, if they're just viewing it, no. Because they're doing the work here, they're going to have a client access license to import back and do any type of modification to that server. Another one here, we have another one, has a Power Platform. Again, we're looking at the automation. We're looking at people editing the data. And even though in this scenario, where because they're adding the data, they decide to no and go, and they manually hit send perform on Power Platform. So you can see, even though the user A is performing a manual step in the process, they are not performing all steps, and it's an automation step. Because it's automation, here again, you're going to have the client access licensing for it. And again, I just want to put that on here because there's a lot of people that are looking at 365 as a CRM tool. I know Microsoft's really pushing that if you have a volume agreement. They're kind of added on, hey, just try a couple of these licenses, see what you think. They're trying to compete against, some of the other big CRM players out there. If you're thinking about it, remember, once you start buying some of these licenses and or these servers, once you start setting the access up, you have the potential here of setting your whole organization up for being under licensed, for being non-compliant with Microsoft licensing terms. And in that scenario, you can be looking at a big purchase for something that you thought was maybe a test. Hey, we're just kind of doing this internally. We're not really looking at it that much. But once you start letting some users, some other people start accessing, people ask others to, give them permission to see it. An easy way here that you can become non-compliant, and you're looking at a potential, shortfall. And then here again, because these are subscription licenses, Microsoft's seeing who's accessing it. These are instant red flags to Microsoft in regards to coming at you and asking to do an audit, asking to kind of review your environment. So when I hit SQL Server, I covered a SQL Server's license per core, and it allowed unlimited people to access the SQL Server itself. Windows Server is required to support SQL. You need a client access license for Windows. Most customers have this. This one's not really a big issue for internal users. The thing is though, even though Windows servers per core, I've had customers that see the per core, they think that you don't have to buy client access licensing for Windows at that point. You still need to. There's no getting around that for the internal users. Where some people tend to be under licensed is in when you have like the website that's supporting a Windows server supporting a website. You have customers hitting that website. A lot of times I get the question, hey, how do I access my customers? How do I access internet non-employees to access or to utilize my my software if it's on a website? If it's anonymous access, anonymous being you go to a news site, or you come visit Miro's website, you click on it, you read about our great services and features. In that scenario, you don't have to worry about a client access license or licensing that internet user, because it's anonymous. They're just viewing static pages that are on the website and just getting that data there. Where you become an issue is with authenticated users. Your organization allows customers to create a username and password. Once they create that username and password, they're considered authenticated. You know who they are. You can count that number. In that scenario, everybody, once they become authenticated, any server that they hit directly or indirectly requires that end user to be licensed. And when I say directly or indirectly, I mean, I remember we did the multiplexing, that you log into that site, you then do a search, and you're like searching through the internet, and that search hits other web pages, not other web pages, but other servers in my organization. In that scenario, each of those servers is going to require that user be licensed. Now, there's a couple ways to do it. One, you can buy them a client access license. It's going to be kind of expensive if you have a bunch of users, but there is a license called an external connector license. That external connector license allows unlimited number of people, non-employees, to access that particular server for as many people as you can. Now, when I say that particular server, I mean physical. Now, physical doesn't mean that you can't do virtual. It means that particular physical box. So if I have a host that's supporting multiple virtual instances, I can buy that external connector for that physical host. That physical host then is licensed for all the virtual instances on that host. If you have more than one host, or if you have where you have vMotion on, where it can change and go to other different servers and go to other hosts throughout an environment, each of those hosts is going to require an external connector. In regards to Windows, this is probably the number one area that I see customers that are under licensed or don't have the proper licensing. A lot of times this gets passed on by the reseller. It's an easy license to miss. People don't always buy it. It's not something like Windows or SQL or Office. It's an easy thing when people are buying it. They may have bought it in the past. It doesn't always get renewed, or you added to your network, you added new hosts. So you would need new external connectors. But again, it's a very easy thing to miss, and this opens you up for non-compliance. And again, you don't want non-compliance. It allows Microsoft to come in. They can kind of see that. It provides, expenses or costs that you may not be planning on. It also just gives them some extra strength or things to kind of, get you to buy more software. And again, this is where working with us, we'll go through that. We'll make sure that you have the external connectors. In fact, that's one of our questions we like to ask when you're coming to us, is if any of these things are hosted, if there's any, how many of these are virtualized. They may seem like simple questions, but when you don't have it and you have to do this upfront purchase in regards to an audit, it's not always a pleasant experience to have to go through. So some takeaways I'd like to cover was, again, understand when you're purchasing the client access license and when you're talking about multiplexing, I kind of just like to throw this up here. Software assurance gives you the rights to new versions. I like to put on here that understand that software assurance is a good option when you're buying client access licenses. Just because we kind of covered clients with the multiplexing. When you're buying these licenses, it's really good to always buy these with software assurance. It covers you for new versions. So if you upgrade one of these servers, if you upgrade any of the software there that these clients are accessing, it gives you the rights to access that new version. Also, if software assurance, to remember, if you remember some of these products, it may be required when you're using different usage scenarios. If you're doing things like virtualization, if you're taking advantage of maybe multiple installs or like multiple versions that you can use, software assurance may be required for some of these features that you may automatically be using. I like to put that on there just because it's something easy to miss. It's something easy to drop on some of these products. And, we don't want to see you have that surprise of a non-compliance surprise. And another big one is software vendors. When you're dealing with third-party software vendors, I've run into quite a few times where people have been told by the vendor, hey, we have an agreement with Microsoft. You don't have to worry about the client access license. You don't have to worry about, this particular license because, we're fine. We're good with it. It's included in this. If that's the case, I always tell people, make sure you get that in writing from them. Have them show you in their licensing terms or in their organization where they have it written that you don't have that's not an issue. Usually it's just by the sales team or somebody talking to you about it. The problem is they're not Microsoft. If you're audited, that's going to be Microsoft's response. Those aren't Microsoft. They can't make licensing decisions for you. You need to understand and go with Microsoft, go with from what they're telling you why you need the license. Here again, you're working with a third party. Make sure that you understand what you're buying, what's included with that license, and what's not included. The more you know, the better the better you're going to be able to be prepared and understand your purchasing and understand your environment. Okay, so with the requirement for all users, all devices need to be proper licensed. Remember, Microsoft has like the user device client access license options. It's really good to remember which to buy, which one's better, or do you need a mix? There's some organizations, say as hospitals, where you may have a mix of these two when you're accessing these servers and when you're using these things. Again, it's highly recommend understand your organization, understand your best licensing choices, and any review that you do. Remember, you should include your past and future. I say past because the past sometimes repeats itself. Your organization did things a certain way. It's doing something new. Management may go down the road and say, hey, we don't like the way we're going in this scenario or this move. We kind of want to go back. We want to go back to this. If you're in charge of the licensing, that can be a cost to you. That can be a big thing. So it's good to understand that where you came from, your future plans, how that's going to affect it. And if you would decide to go back, how that's going to change or how that's going to affect your costs as well. With that, I'll hand that back to Sean.
Thanks, Vince. And what we always say to people is, it's definitely worth having a second look. A lot of people we talk to, they're very surprised that they ended up in the situation they're in, because, like Vince said, they typically hear from one or two people who tell them, no, everything's going to be just fine. You don't need to worry about it. And those two types are typically a Microsoft reseller, or as Vince mentioned earlier, someone who sells a different product that in some way involves Microsoft. And many of the times we see people who have these issues, it's because no one ever had a second look. And one of the things I want to let you know is that's something we can do for you, even if you've already got a Microsoft person, even if you've already got a reseller. It's definitely worth getting a second opinion, because if that person who gave the advice is wrong, I mean, it could cost you millions of dollars. And that's the last thing you want to, have to say is to go to your boss and say, "Oh, we have $1 million of unplanned expenses." And we won't charge anything for that. We'll be more than happy just to take a quick look at what you've got. And if we see something great, we may be able to save some money. But if not, it's a no cost obligation. I do see we have a couple of questions. If you have any questions, please type them in the control box, the question box now. I could say we have a couple here that I'm going to say we definitely have to get back to you afterward. There's too many open questions about what exactly you're doing and what you're doing it with, and it's one of those. Every situation is different. But if there are no other questions, Vince, if you want to go to the next slide. If you want to reach out to us after this, you can reach us at info@miroconsulting.com. You can find us on the web, or you can reach out to us at 732-738-8511. And again, we'd be more than happy to take a second look at your Microsoft environment and let you know whether everything's okay or whether you might have some major issues. With that, that concludes the webinar. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. And like I said, the people who asked a question, we're going to get back to you right after this event. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.